Yeah, but before we even do that, just because I can't wait because I'm so excited about it, I want to show you this, which Rachel spotted because I posted it on social media, and I was impressed that you'd spotted the thing. But if you just come over here, this is why I was saying there's a couple of them wanted to sit here, and I was like, no, back off, don't sit here. This is like a tracking related, well, it's a bit of tracking basically, which is something that I'm really into, something that we'll cover a bit today as well, is like looking at the tracks and signs that wildlife leaves behind. That in itself, like tracking, is so interesting because of what it can tell us, about, even if we don't see a particular animal, there's so many clues around, and that really ties into the kind of the science aspects of studying plants and wildlife, and there's everywhere. Even if you're somewhere fairly urban, there'll be signs of some kind of wildlife around, and kids love looking for clues and looking for like evidence of stuff, and it's kind of quite a fun thing. So what caught my eye here, and this I'm going to take you through the process. So I was going for a wee kind of walk/run yesterday morning, coming past here, and I saw this collection of cones. Can you see there's a really dense collection of these cones? We'll look at this is actually from citrus fruit. So the citrus fruit you can see is right there. There's a few you can see there's a few cones dotted around, and it's kind of makes sense, like from the wind or whatever. They're quite light, they could blow in a really strong wind. But this here is weird, like the fact that they're all like this, just a concentration. You can see, like if you scan over, you just see like a dense concentration here, and that straight away kind of like starts maybe kind of, hold on, something's going on here. And I had a hunch, and the funny thing is, I was like, wow, I think this is what it is. I was looking, and then I looked up and saw this right here, like just staring me in the face. But can you see? So one of them is actually jammed here between these two branches. And so a lot of what we'll be looking at today as well as like identifying stuff and looking at clues, there's a ton about just asking questions and being curious. And again, when we're engaging kids, I'm sure you do, it's a lot about engaging curiosity. So then there's a whole load of questions we can ask about this. But I know that at least some of you know like what happened here. But if you have any guesses or ideas, or you may well know, just feel free to say what you see or what you think could have happened here. And there's no, don't be afraid of that's a silly answer or something. Don't worry, no such thing as a silly question or silly answer or anything. Just fire out ideas of what do you think happened here? What are the possibilities?
That's why I thought a squirrel took it up.
It must be something agile because it's gone up the tree with something, so it's not a heavy animal.
Not heavy, yeah. So in fact, this is actually, just go really briefly through this. I wasn't actually planning to do this way, but it's a really fun thing. I often use this on tracking courses. There's a whole kind of process, or just a very brief version of it, where it's kind of like detective work in a way, where we have a kind of a list of possible suspects, and so if we list a few different animals that this could be, and then we can make a case for it being each of those, and make a case against it being each of those, and when we do this process a lot, when we're doing this in tracking, it really helps us just in our understanding of nature and in our kind of deduction and all of that. But,
Dan, can I ask a question, please? Is certain animals like certain trees? I know that sounds really silly, but
do certain
animals like certain trees?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Do they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's
That's a great question. We can talk a bit more about that. There'll be loads of examples actually as we go around of how that.
Is that because of the smell, or because of the height, or is it?
Oh, tons of different things. Yes, tons of things. And as we do the trio ID and some of the stuff, we look at different examples. There's so many different examples of different things about particular trees and other smaller plants, including things like smell or taste, or the fact that they've got good soft wood that can be drilled into it, like loads of different stuff. So, yeah, but we'll definitely look more at that. So let's have a list of possible suspects. So we had squirrel as one of them.
I'm going to go badger, but I don't think it
badger. Yeah, great. Yeah. And this is really good. So let's put badger. When we're doing this process, I always say it's good to include one or two kind of wild cards that we think it's probably not that, but it's still really good in this process to be able to argue for or against it. It helps us really keep an open mind.
Badgers eat flora and fauna.
So that we'll get
tend to be carnivores.
Yeah, we'll get onto that in a sec. When we do this the questioning process, we'll get onto that. So we've got badger.
Did you get an otter?
Badger, squirrel, otter. Let's have an otter. There's otters on the burn right here. Yeah. So three. Let's have one or two more.
A bird.
A bird of some kind.
Ferret.
Stoats, weasels.
I was thinking of
weasel.
weasel.
Suggest a bird.
It is. Crows are clever.
What kind of a bird?
There's plenty of there's loads of birds all up there this morning.
So let's randomly chuck in like crow and say woodpecker as another one.
Oh, yes.
Maybe just like giving a bit of a clue there. But even so, we can go through this process. So what we do first is like we're only going to make a case for it being one of these animals, not against. No arguments against. We'll get to arguments against it being these animals, if that makes sense in a second. But first round we're going for. So the first one we had was squirrel, wasn't it? So why could this be a squirrel?
Because it can climb trees.
Squirrels can climb trees. They're agile. They easily can make it there.
Can those teeth that they'd be able to grip into that and climb up with it?
Yeah, squirrel can easily carry a cone.
Carry a phone.
Cones are open.
They collect stuff.
See how that branch at the bottom looks like it's been chewed or
This
gnawed
here.
or aye.
Right.
Does
So
that have anything to do with it?
it's for now, for this bit of the thing, we can say, oh, maybe that's a related thing. We can get onto that in the arguments against. We can get it, but that's a good point. There's some other evidence here. Something's happened. Maybe it's
Squirrel's
related to
flexible, as in it's agile enough to move it up
Yeah.
there.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
small enough to park itself there. along
Definitely,
with
yeah.
the
So you can imagine a squirrel doing it. Yeah. Anything else squirrel-wise? Case for squirrels.
The cones are open, so the seeds must be available.
So yeah, and we know that squirrels like the seeds in cones for sure. Yeah. Another thing when we're doing this whole process is actually looking at, is this particular animal in the area? And we may or may not know, but in this case we know squirrels are around here. But it could be another animal, and I'm not sure. And then that means we go and look it up, and then we start to learn more about the animals in the area. So see what I mean? So it starts to already stretch our awareness of stuff. So that's squirrel. So the next one we had was badger. So why could this be a badger?
Can they stand on two legs? Is that-
Badgers can easily stand.
I reckon he's up there.
A big male badger could reach, like just standing on his back legs, reaching up his paws, his face could probably get to about there. And and badgers can climb as well. Badgers could easily, actually, surprisingly, not super high, but a badger could easily climb with a leaning thing like that up to about that height. So yeah.
I'm happy to say.
It's a badger waiting in Aslan myself.
So, and then other things around badgers. Do we get badgers in the area? Yeah. If we looked on a kind of a Scotland-wide map, we'd see badgers in this area. And then when we have local knowledge as well, when you get to know a patch, you know a particular spot. And here there's loads of signs. There's actually tons of badgers all around here, so we know there's badgers. Right? And then what was the next one we had? Otter. So why could it be an otter?
Because of the water
Because
connection.
it's
right near the good otter habitat, and I've seen signs of otters on the camera track right around here. Otters are pretty big.
So I was going to say, do you think it'd be flexible enough to get up to there?
Yeah, at a push. I don't know how otters are with climbing, but I wouldn't be surprised. Actually, yeah, they can climb like badgers in sloping trees. They can climb up sometimes. Yeah. And then what was the next one we had?
Birds.
So we had a crow.
And woodpecker.
Crows. So a lot of what we're seeing are rooks, which are in the crow family. And so more broadly, you could say they're crows, but they're a particular kind. So these are rooks, and they're cool. We're going to birds a bit more in a bit, but they've got a very particular, like, soft, gravelly call. Like, can you hear it?
Yeah.
Like you hear an average carrion crow, and they're kind of like, it's kind of a harsh kind of thing. But rooks, and you often see loads of rooks together. So these are rooks. But anyway, we've got tons of rooks and other kinds of crows. That was a carrion crow there in the mountain. But so there's crows around, rooks around, all sorts. So they're around, we know that. So any other case for this being a crow of some kind? Could have been carrion, could have dropped it and it was just a jammy, like, just like went into that. We know that crows are pretty clever. That whole family are really clever, and they do kind of stuff like that. They kind of, I don't know, they could easily jam something in there, or yeah. So, and then we had woodpecker. So why could this be a woodpecker? Where it is in the tree, again, a woodpecker could carry that. And then giving a bit of like kind of my thought process around it, and some of you may well know as well, woodpeckers actually are known to do this. They actually jam stuff like nuts and cones in a cavity of some kind because it holds it still, and then they can actually peck and get the seeds. And then also when they do that, if they have a favourite place, you'll tend to see loads of discarded ones all around below. So it looks very woodpeckery in that way to me. It's like really kind of quite typical behaviour. In terms of woodpeckers in the area, they're definitely, again, if we looked at a range map and then also hanging around here a lot, I see them around quite a bit. And in some of these cones as well, it's woodpeckers, when they peck the cones, it's not always obvious. Sometimes when they do it on Scots pine cones, we'll look at some pine, it's much more obviously like the cones are shattered. With these spruce cones, it's not so clear, but there's one here, and it's quite subtle, but when I look at it, it looks kind of quite messy and a bit bashed up. So that one there is quite a sign of, okay, something's happened to that. But there's others which it's not so clear, but that's one where it is. And let's make a case against it being all of those animals. So why not a squirrel?
It's not their favourite food.
Yeah, so squirrels, when they're eating, so when they're getting seeds out, they tend to hold the cone and they're biting the scales off. I'm sure some of you at least will be familiar with, when you see a squirrel cone, we'll look at some later when it's actually been fed on by a squirrel, and they actually bite down, kind of, you can see the scales bitten off. These have got all the scales on there, so it doesn't look like it's been fed on by a squirrel at all. And I don't know of squirrels, I think they'll actually do that with a mushroom, funny enough. Like, you get some big toadstools, mushrooms, where squirrels will hang them in a tree like that to dry and catch them, gather them later on. So if you find some kind of mushroom like just weirdly hanging up in a tree, it's probably a squirrel that did it. But with cones like this, I don't see that with squirrels. So yeah, and it's not the kind of feeding sign, the damage isn't squirrel like. And then why not a badger? They don't eat pine or spruce seeds or cones. As far as I know, they might, if they found a seed on the ground, they might nibble it, but generally it's not something they go for. It's just not their thing. Badgers actually eat tons of different stuff. They're really omnivorous, but they much prefer to go for other different stuff. So it's not typical badger food, not typical badger behaviour as well, even though it could climb up there. I just don't know if badgers like going to stick that cone in there and climb down. It's just not what badgers.
There's no scratches on it.
No scratch. That's a good point. Actually, you'd expect maybe to see some marks of like badger claw marks because they've got such long claws on them. Yeah. So why not an otter?
Maybe they don't like to eat that.
Yeah, it's pretty much ditto with the badgers. What we said with the badgers.
And stuff, don't they?
Yeah, and otters are like real. Whereas badgers are omnivores, so they will eat some kind of plant stuff. Like they'll eat roots and they eat fruit and stuff. Otters are like pure carnivores. They eat fish, and ducks, and voles and stuff. They just don't look at they wouldn't look at a cone in that way. And it's not really ottery behaviour. They're much more interested in fish and stuff. And then why not a crow?
We're eliminating everything. What is it going to be? I'm thinking, no, we haven't it.
So with the crow, again, this isn't just typical of, and this is where it's something you may be familiar with, but if not, it's the kind of thing, I don't know if a crow does that or not. Then you can look up, then do a bit of research and stuff, and that's interesting. And or actually do direct observations. And you can do this with kids as well. Over time, you might have a particular question about a robin in your little patch where you are, where it might be just a very small patch of ground. But then you start to get to know individual animals and just observe them directly, learn what you can directly. That's a really super valuable way of doing it. But with crows, never seen them do that. It's not a known behaviour with our crows where they jam them in there, get seeds out and leave a load there. It's just not a typical thing. And why not woodpecker? And I should add as well, even if we think it is something, like I'm certain this is woodpecker, but even if we think it's still good just to kind of like stretch to still keep an open mind, because it's so easy when we're tracking to kind of jump to a conclusion too quickly. So to think of some reason why it's not a woodpecker. That's one of the things. And occasionally I find them like this kind of fairly low down, but I also see them probably more often where they're doing it high up, and it makes me think, maybe they're a bit more vulnerable low down. Perhaps we could say that. Also, a lot of these cones don't look that damaged. Maybe why aren't they particularly damaged?
Could they have came from? Well, last night was very windy, so some of the cones aren't damaged because it's just in the moment it's happened. So now it's just nature trying. It might have only happened last night or the day before. So now this is where they're going to come back, and could it be just something as simple as that.
What, it's like wind blowing?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's another thing we could say. Oh, it's possibly something else like wind, and even though it's quite clustered, you know, if you get really strong winds, you get it with leaves, don't you? Where they kind of there's eddies and they cluster in one way, so that could be much stronger.
But even like the weight, so like woodpecker is like little.
Yeah.
So from an early years point of view, is a woodpecker big enough to carry?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a great question actually, because then you could say, yeah, you could say, wow, actually woodpeckers can they really do that? Like, that's a fair sized thing. You can imagine a woodpecker. How does it get it in its bill and fly? Yeah.
There's a lot in there. There's quite a lot there, like for them to go back and forth.
It's quite an open question, isn't it?
Yeah, so it's time. So there's this bit, and obviously a lot of this stuff we'll be doing today. There's a lot of stuff that's for your own benefit personally, in terms of, because like saying, I want to learn more about plant and animals ID and stuff like that. And there's ways that no doubt you'll know how to adapt it to the level. Some of the questions you've been asking here are kind of too high of a level, obviously, for some really young ones. But there's ways that we can adapt it to make it much kind of simpler questions that are still really engaging. So based on all of that, like kind of like, what does the jury think? Like what's woodpecker? Yeah. This is really kind of classic woodpecker sign. It's really nice example.
I think going back to what you said at the beginning, it's really interesting to keep the animals and that are here rather than animals that you might only see. And I know this is a really extreme example, like a koala bear in Australia. You won't see that here. So I think it's important to keep it so that it's in the vicinity that the children do see it every time, all the days, every time, and they can relate it to something rather than saying it's an eagle which you'll never see unless you go such and such and such.
Right,
Exactly.
Exactly, that could be
So
quite a fun way. A fun way of doing it. Actually chucking in one that is like a koala or a polar bear, and saying, and then saying like, do we have them here in Scotland?
Because specifically, what is actually the difference between the weasel and the squirrel that you're going to get?
Yeah.
You know, they look different, but essentially they're quite agile. And,
Right.
You know, using different help them sort out why are they different.
Yeah.